Caesar, Book 1, Translation 1. All Gaul is divided into 3 parts, one of which the Belgae inhabit, the Aquitani another. The third, who in their own language are called Celts, and ours, Gauls. All these differ from each other in language, customs, and laws. The river Garonne separates the Gauls from the Aquitani. The Marne and the Seine separate them from the Belgae. Of all these, the Belgae are the bravest because they are furthest from the civilization and refinement of our province, and merchants least frequently resort to them and import those things which tend to effeminate the mind. And they are the nearest to the Germans, who dwell beyond the Rhine, with whom they are continually waging war, for which reason the Helvetii also surpass the rest of the Gauls in courage, as they contend with the Germans in almost daily battles, when they either repel them from their own territories or themselves wage war on their frontiers. One part of these, which it has been said that the Gauls occupy, takes its beginning at the river Rhone. It is bounded by the river Garonne, the ocean, and the territories of the Belgae. It borders, too, on the same side of the Sequani and the Helvetii upon the river Rhine, and stretches toward the north. The Belgae rises from the extreme frontier of Gaul, extends to the lower part of the river Rhine, and look toward the north and the rising sun. Aquitania extends from the river Garonne to the Pyrenean Mountains and to that part of the ocean which is near Spain. It looks between the setting of the sun and the northwest. Caesar, Book 1, Translation 2. Among the Helvetii, Orgetorix was by far the most noble and richest. Marcus Messala and Marcus Publius Piso were consuls, 61 BC. He, having been influenced by the desire of royal authority, formed a conspiracy of the nobility and persuaded the citizens to depart from their territories with all of their supplies, and human resources, he persuaded that it would be very easy, since they excelled all in manliness, to obtain authority of the whole of Gaul. He persuaded this to them more easily because of this reason, because the Helvetians are bound on all sides by the nature of the place, they are bound from one direction by the Rhine River, the widest and deepest, which separates the Helvetian territory from the Germans. From another direction, they are bound by the very tall Jura mountain range, which is between the Sequani and the Helvetians. From the third direction, they are bound by Lake Geneva, which separates our province from the Helvetians. Because of these things, it happened that they could wander less widely and could less easily make war upon neighboring peoples. For this reason, the people, eager for waging war, were affected with great distress. However, in proportion to the large number of men, and in proportion to the fame of war and bravery, they thought that they had narrow boundaries, which used to extend 240,000 of paces in length and 180,000 of paces, Roman miles in width. Caesar, Book 1, Translation 3. Having been influenced by these matters and moved by the authority of Orgetorix, they decided to prepare those things that pertain to departing, to buy as great number as possible of pack animals and wagons, to make their sowings as large as possible so that plenty of grain would be set aside on the journey. And they decided to establish the peace and friendship with the neighboring states. They had decided that 2 years would be enough for themselves to accomplish these things. They established their departure by law for the 3rd year. Orgetorix is chosen to accomplish these things. he took upon himself the ambassadorship to the states. On the journey he persuaded Casticus, the son of Catamantaliodus, one of the Sequani whose father possessed authority over the people for many years and who had been called a friend of the Roman people by the Senate, to seize power in his own territory, which his father previously held. And likewise he persuades Dumnorix and Iduin, the brother of Dewiciacus, who at the time possessed the chief authority in the state and was exceedingly beloved by the people, to attempt the same thing, and gives him his daughter in marriage. He proves to them that to accomplish their attempts was very easy to be done, because he himself would obtain the government of his own state, that there was no doubt that the Helvetii were the most powerful of the whole of Gaul. He assures them that he will acquire the sovereignty for them with his own troops and his own army. Having been influenced by the speech, they give a pledge and oath to one another, and hope that when they have seized the sovereignty, they will, by means of the three most powerful and valiant nations, be enabled to obtain possession of the whole of Gaul. Caesar, Book 1, Translation 4. When this scheme was disclosed to the Helvetians by informers, they, according to their customs, compelled Orgetorix to plead his case in chains. It was necessary that the penalty of being burned by fire should await him, if condemned. On the day established for the pleading of his case, Orgetorix drew together from all sides his entire household, to the number of 10,000 people, and led together to the same place all his clients and debaters, of whom he had a large number. Through them he rescued himself from pleading the case, while the state, outraged by this act, attempted to assert its right by arms, and the magistrates were mustering a large body of men from the country. Orgetorix died, nor is the suspicion lacking, as the Helvetians think, that he himself committed suicide. Caesar, Book 1, Translation 5. After his death, the Helvetians nevertheless attempted to do that which they had decided, namely to go out of their territories as soon as they thought that they were prepared for this undertaking. They burned all their towns to the number of 12, and their villages to the number of 400, and the remaining private buildings they burn up all the grain, except what they intend to carry with them, so that after the hope of returning home was destroyed, they might be more prepared for enduring all dangers. They order everyone to bring for himself 3 months of grain from home. They persuade the Rurci and the Tulingi and the Latobrigi, their neighbors, that relying on the same plan, they should depart together with them after their towns and villages were burned, and they admit to their party and unite to themselves as allies the Boii, who had dwelled on the other side of the Rhine and had crossed over into Noriccan territory and assaulted Noreia. Caesar, Book 1, Translation 6. There were in all 2 routes by which they could go forth from their country, one through the Sequani, narrow and difficult, between Mount Jura and the Rhone River, by which scarcely one wagon at a time could be led, but a very small mountain was looming above, so that very few could easily intercept them. The other, through our province, was much easier and more unimpeded, because through the boundaries of the Helvetians and of the Allobroges, who had recently been subdued, the Rhone flows, and in some places it is crossed by a ford. The furthest town of the Allobroges and the nearest to the Helvetian boundaries is Geneva. From this town, a bridge extends to the Helvetii. They were thinking that they should either persuade the Allobroges, because they did not yet seem to be well disposed towards the Roman people, or they should compel them by force to allow them to go through their territories. After all these things were prepared for the departure, they appoint a day on which day they should all come together at the bank of the Rhone River. This day was March 28th, when Lucius Piso and Aulus Gabinus were consuls, 58 BC. Caesar, Book 1, Translation 7. When this had been announced to Caesar, that they were attempting to make a journey through our province, he hastens to set out from the city, and by the longest journeys possible, he proceeds to further Gaul and arrives at Geneva. He requisitions from the whole province as a great number of soldiers as possible. There was in all in further Gaul only 1 legion. He orders that the bridge which was at Geneva be torn down. When the Helvetians were made more certain of his arrival, they sent the noblest ambassadors of the state to him, of which embassy Namius and Clotius held chief position, in order to say that it was in their mind to make a journey through the province without any mischief, because they had no other way. They requested that it be permissible for them to do this. Caesar, because he held in his memory that the consul Lucius Cassius had been slain and his army was routed and sent under the yoke, did not think that their request ought to be granted, nor did he think that men of a hostile disposition, if the opportunity to make their way through the province were given, would refrain from damage and mischief. Nevertheless, in order that a period of time might intervene until the soldiers whom he had commanded should assemble, he replied to the envoys that he would take a day to deliberate. If they wanted something, they should come back on the day before the Ides of April, which is April 12th.